I'm Claire Duncan. I'm 35. And the moment my daughter whispered those words to me across the dinner table, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. "Mommy, if I sit down, it'll hurt my private part." She said it so quietly, like it might get her in trouble just for saying it out loud. And when she did, the room went still for a second. Then the laughter picked back up like nothing happened. They called her dramatic, said she was fussy, too sensitive, but I saw the way she flinched when someone brushed past her shoulder. And later, when I found the drawing tucked into her school folder, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely press the numbers on my phone. I knew the moment I hit send that nothing would be the same after that before I go any further. Tell me where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like button if you've ever had to stand up when no one else would. I was raised in a small town tucked between farmland and faded gas stations. My mama believed in table manners, church on Sundays, and keeping your voice down in other people's homes. We weren't wealthy, but she said we had something better: character. I grew up thinking kindness was currency, and honesty would always be enough. When I left home, it wasn't with bad blood, just space. I moved 2 states over, got my degree in social work, and eventually had my daughter Naomi. Her dad didn't stick around, no big drama. Just one of those disappearings people don't ask too many questions about. So it was just me and Naomi in a little rental with thin walls and a garden that only grew weeds. But we were all right. We had routines, inside jokes, late-night cereal, and we had safety for a while. That was enough. Then came the invitation. Thanksgiving at Mama's. I hadn't been home in years, not since Naomi was a toddler, and I brought green bean casserole no one touched. But Mama called this time, said it was important, said the family missed us, said Naomi was old enough to know where she came from. I hesitated. I almost said no. But Naomi overheard the call and got excited about seeing Grandma and Pi and cousins she barely remembered, so we went. The air outside was sharp that evening. One of those late November days where the cold sneaks into your sleeves. The porch light flickered when we stepped up to the door. Naomi squeezed my hand and said, "It smells like pie in there, Mommy." I pressed the doorbell. Mama's hug was quick. Her perfume, the same powdery lilac she's worn for decades. "You look tired," she said. Not mean, but not warm either. Kaylee, my older sister, was arranging the good crystal on the table like we were royalty. She gave me that smile. "You give someone you wish hadn't shown up." The dining room looked the same, but the walls felt smaller, tighter, like they'd been holding secrets too long. Naomi was quiet, clinging to my coat sleeve as introductions bounced around the room. Uncle Ray was already on his second glass of wine, laughing too loud. Grandma Louise was directing chairs like it was a stage play. Kaylee's daughter and Cousin Joy's boy were seated at the far end of the table. That's where they told Naomi to sit. She hesitated. I nudged her forward, but instead of moving, she leaned in close to me and whispered those words. "If I sit down, it'll hurt my private part." My fork slipped and clanged against my plate. Uncle Ray laughed. "She's always been dramatic, that one," he said. Mama didn't look at Naomi. She looked at me. "Sylvie," she said, "she needs firmer boundaries." They went back to passing the stuffing, like nothing had happened, like my child hadn't just given us all a warning. I reached for Naomi's hand. It was cold and damp. Her fingers curled tight. "We're going to the bathroom, baby," I told her. Not one person stood up. Not one offered to help. I walked her down the hallway as the sounds of dinner resumed behind us. Plates, clinking, voices rising. Someone blessed the cranberry sauce. The guest bathroom smelled like lavender, but no amount of soap could cover what I saw when Naomi stepped out of her tights. And in that moment, I knew this night wasn't about pie or casseroles or family. It was the beginning of a truth I couldn't unsee. I held Naomi's hand as we stepped out of the bathroom, her tights bundled under my arm. She walked slowly, her steps stiff, her gaze low. We moved past the faded family portraits and toward the guest room at the end of the hall. I tucked her in under the quilt, placed her raccoon beside her, and whispered that I'd be right outside the door. She nodded, her face, still flushed eyes, glossy and quiet. Back in the hallway, Mama was waiting. Her arms were crossed, her voice low and sharp. "Is this necessary?" she asked, not looking at the door I'd just come through. "Dinner's getting cold." "Naomi isn't well," I said. "We're stepping out." Kaylee stood nearby, arms folded tight across her chest. "You're making a scene," she said, shaking her head. I turned without answering. The front door was just a few feet away. I stepped onto the porch and pulled out my phone. The screen glowed blue in the early dark. My thumb hovered for a second before I pressed the call button. The dispatcher answered quickly, asking my location. I told her the address and said, "I need someone to come. I think something's been happening to my daughter." By the time the first set of headlights appeared down the block, the house behind me was warm and full of voices. I stayed out there, coatless arms wrapped around myself. The police cruiser eased to the curb. Behind it, an ambulance pulled in red lights, flashing gently across the frost-lined yard. 2 officers stepped out, 1 man and 1 woman. The female EMT followed, swinging a red bag from her shoulder. They walked up the porch together. Before they could knock, Mama flung the door open. She blinked at the uniforms. "Did someone pass out, Sylvia?" "What have you done?" I didn't raise my voice. "My daughter needs a medical exam. She's in the guest room." Mama's face didn't move much, but I saw it, just a flicker of something hard, tightening in her eyes. She didn't invite them in, but she didn't stop them either. As soon as the door opened, the smell of sage and turkey hit us like a wall. Laughter and the sound of dishes floated in from the dining room. But the moment the officer stepped inside, everything paused. Kaylee came hurrying over from the table. "You can't be serious," she whispered. Her jaw clenched. "You're doing this in front of everyone." Uncle Ray stood at the doorway to the living room, arms crossed. "This is what happens when unstable people become parents," he muttered. I didn't respond. I focused on Naomi's room. The EMT had gone in and knelt beside her. Naomi sat cross-legged on the bed, her raccoon in her lap, watching the woman carefully. She gave a tiny nod when asked for permission to check her. Then the 2 of them stepped into the adjoining bathroom. 1 officer stood in the hall, waiting just outside. I stayed nearby, my back against the kitchen wall. My hands trembled slightly, but I kept them still. In the other room, silverware clinked. Someone whispered a prayer over sweet potatoes. Kaylee moved beside me again. "Is she sick? Did she fall? Or is this about her whining at dinner?" she asked. I didn't answer. I didn't take my eyes off that narrow hallway. Minutes passed. The hallway clock ticked so loudly it sounded like it was keeping time for everyone's nerves. Finally, the EMT stepped out. She caught my eye and gave the smallest nod. Then she motioned for me to come with her to the kitchen. Her voice was low. "She confirmed there's been touching," she said carefully. "Repeatedly." She hesitated. She named someone. I held the edge of the counter to keep myself steady. "Who?" She paused. "Your brother-in-law." I stared straight ahead, the kitchen tile blurring slightly. My ears buzzed. I inhaled until my ribs ached. Then I nodded. "Thank you," I said. "Please stay with her." The officer moved next. He turned toward the living room, the one with the fireplace crackling, the one where the gravy was still warm. "Mr. Rollins," he said, stepping in. The room erupted. Mama shot up from her seat. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "Marcus would never—" Kaylee rushed across to the hardwood. "You're tearing this family apart," she snapped, grabbing at my sleeve. Marcus stood from the table, slow and deliberate, his expression all confusion and hurt. "I didn't do anything." "She's confused," he said, shaking his head. The officers remained calm. They read his rights. Then came the sound cuffs, tightening the metal, catching around bone. Grandma Louise covered her mouth. Cousin Joy burst into tears. Somewhere near the kitchen, the dog barked once, then stopped. From the guest room, Naomi peeked out. I met her eyes and went to her. I crouched until we were face to face. "You did the right thing," I told her, brushing a strand of hair away from her cheek. "You're safe now." Her little fingers slid into mine. "I was scared to tell," she whispered. "I know," I said. "But you're not alone anymore." We both stood still as Marcus was walked past, hands cuffed behind his back. When the front door opened, the cold November air rushed through the hallway, cutting through every smell and sound. Marcus turned once, looked at me. There was no apology in his face, just something dark and unreadable. Mama followed him to the doorframe, but she didn't look at him. She stared at me. Her voice was tight. "I'll never forgive you for this." I didn't say anything back. I helped Naomi into her shoes and jacket, then guided her to the ambulance. An EMT handed me a small folder, resources for trauma response. My fingers trembled as I took it. By the time I gave my statement at the precinct and we returned home, it was nearly dawn. The sky outside was pale and cold. I tucked Naomi into bed, sat at the edge of the mattress, and waited until her breathing evened out. 7 days passed. No one from the family called. No one texted. Not even a sad face emoji on the social media post I made explaining Naomi's absence from school. When I tried Mama's number, it came up as blocked. Kaylee's voicemail was full. Only one call came Pastor Jensen. His message was sweet, measured, and useless. He said he was praying, and maybe I should consider stepping back from the women's group until the dust settled. The dust. As if my daughter's pain was something that just needed a moment to clear. At home, the quiet wasn't peaceful. The heater kicked too loud. The fridge hummed like it had something to say. Naomi started crawling into my bed at night, hooking her fingers around my sleeve. One Tuesday morning, I found her at the kitchen table, sitting up straight on a pillow I'd placed on the chair. She asked, "Is it okay to sit now?" I said yes. She didn't smile, but she ate her cereal. Later that week, her teacher called. "Nothing urgent," she said, "but there's something you should see." Naomi had drawn a picture in class. When I arrived, the teacher showed me a red sheet of construction paper. In crayon, Naomi had drawn a chair with sharp spikes jutting out of it, and a stick girl crying above it. Off to the side, a dark scribble with teeth. She told me that was Grandma's chair, the teacher said, and that it hurt. The school counselor had already contacted CPS. That evening, Naomi colored at the coffee table while I reheated dinner. I saw a photo album open beside her. A sticker had been placed over Uncle Ben's face, the brother who always brought extra candy and card tricks. I didn't say anything, just took a mental note. At bedtime, Naomi asked if she ever had to go back there. I told her no, not ever. She nodded, then murmured, "There's something I didn't tell you yet, about the game he played." I told her we'd talk in the morning, but I didn't sleep much that night. She curled up beside me and whispered one more thing. Uncle Marcus liked the quiet game. If I stayed really still, I won. She said Grandma saw once, and told her she was being difficult. When Naomi finally drifted off, I sat in the hallway, hugging my knees, listening to the hum of the furnace, knowing what I had to do next. Naomi slept more often in my bed than her own that week. She didn't ask most nights. She just showed up quietly, dragging her blanket behind her, sometimes carrying the raccoon by its tail. She'd climb in and curl beside me, one hand always tucked under the edge of my sleeve. The first night I thought maybe it was the cold, but after the third night in a row, I understood she just needed to be near someone who wouldn't disappear. In the mornings, she stayed close. At the table, she'd fold her legs up onto the chair like she was bracing herself, even when I stacked 2 cushions beneath her. I kept breakfast simple toast oatmeal cereal if we were running late. She ate, but never with much interest. I'd ask about class, her favorite books, what they were working on in art. Sometimes she'd nod. Most days, she just kept drawing in the margins of her notebook. It was a Thursday when she sat at the table, turning her spoon in a bowl of oatmeal. "Mommy," she said softly, "you promised I'd never have to go back." I told her again that she wouldn't. She gave a small nod, but her shoulders stayed tight, like she wasn't ready to believe it. Later that evening, after dinner, she came into the living room holding a crumpled piece of paper. She didn't say anything, just placed it on the coffee table and sat cross-legged beside me. It was another drawing stick figures, one small girl, two tall adults drawn with frowning mouths. Above the child was a big red X. No names, no words. But she looked at me like she wanted to know if I understood. The next morning, I called the caseworker and left a message with her office. I said Naomi had disclosed additional information and asked to schedule a follow-up. They called me back an hour later, and we set the appointment for that afternoon at the Advocacy Center across town. Riverstone was a quiet building, a one-story ranch-style house painted soft teal with white shutters and trimmed hedges. Inside the waiting room had low shelves with puzzles books and plastic dinosaurs. Naomi didn't touch any of them. She sat beside me, turning her raccoon's tail between her fingers. The therapist introduced herself gently and offered Naomi a juice box. Naomi nodded, said thank you, and followed her into the playroom. I stayed behind the glass in the observation room watching through the mirror as the therapist got on the floor eye level and asked simple, clear questions. Naomi answered in a voice that was steady but low. She talked about games she had to play and how she wasn't supposed to move or make noise. She said that if she did cry, she had to start over. She described a chair that hurt when she sat in it. She said Marcus told her if she ever told anyone, I would be taken away. Her hands rested in her lap while she spoke, twisting the hem of her dress. At one point, she lifted the edge of her skirt to show a faint bruise on her upper thigh. The therapist kept her voice soft and even, reassuring her as she took notes and nodded. The session lasted just under an hour. When it ended, I met with the caseworker in a private office. She handed me a folder with counseling referrals, copies of Naomi's intake, and an emergency safety plan. She said the restraining order was already being filed and that Naomi would be eligible for trauma-focused therapy beginning next week. Outside, the sun had dropped low behind the trees. The air smelled like dry leaves and the last hint of summer. I buckled Naomi into the car seat and climbed into the driver's side, hands gripping the steering wheel longer than I needed to. In the rearview mirror, my reflection looked the same but different, like someone who had been bracing against a storm for too long. That night, Naomi fell asleep on the couch with her raccoon tucked under one arm and a drawing pad resting across her lap. I carried her to bed and turned on the nightlight. Then I sat in the kitchen and opened my contacts, scrolling until I found Lauren Pierce's name. We'd met volunteering at the women's shelter years ago. She was sharp-focused and didn't scare easy. I started to draft a message, but before I could finish, my phone lit up. A text from Kaylee. "Stop this or we'll take her from you." I read it twice, then again. The words were short, but they hit like a punch. It wasn't just a threat. It was a line drawn in the sand. I didn't answer. Instead, I closed my phone and went to check on Naomi. She was sound asleep, one arm draped over her pillow mouth, slightly open. I stood in the doorway for a moment before returning to the living room. That night, I sat with an old journal open in front of me. On the inside cover was a picture Naomi at 2 years old, covered in frosting, laughing with both arms raised. My arm was wrapped around her in the photo. It was taken the day Kaylee brought her home from the hospital. I remembered it clearly. I'd rushed over straight from work. I held Naomi first, while Kaylee rested in the hospital bed, pale and quiet. That was the night she said to me, "If I ever lose myself, promise me you'll take care of her." I had promised. I hadn't thought much of it then, but now that promise was the only thing keeping me steady. The next morning, I sat outside the law office of Anna Ramirez. She'd been my college roommate once. We hadn't spoken in years, but she was the only person I trusted for what I knew was coming. She greeted me in her office with a firm handshake and a nod toward the chair. No small talk, she said, settling in across from me. "Tell me what's going on." I laid it all out. The drawings, the exam, the quiet game, the night at Thanksgiving, the threats, the silence. When I handed her my phone and showed her the text from Kaylee, she studied it for a long second, then placed it face down on the desk. "They're testing you," she said. "That's what people like this do. They push to see if you'll bend before they break." "I'm not bending," I said. She nodded. "Good, because it's going to get harder before it gets easier." Anna explained the legal landscape, how Kaylee still had full custody on paper, how Naomi was technically just staying with me. She said if Kaylee filed, she might be able to paint this as a misunderstanding, that the court could still see this as a family dispute unless I had something more solid. But if Naomi's in danger, Anna said, and you've documented every step we can file for emergency guardianship. It's not easy, but it's doable. I asked her what would happen if the rest of the family sided with Kaylee. "They will," she said matter-of-fact, "at first, but the truth has a way of getting louder." As we wrapped up, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Kaylee. "Lunch tomorrow. Just us. Let's talk like grown women." Anna read over my shoulder. "That's not a peace offering," she said. "That's bait." I nodded. "I know. I'm going anyway." The cafe Kaylee picked was one of those bright, cheerful places with tall windows and patterned tile floors. It sat halfway between our neighborhood's neutral ground by design. Inside, the booths were lined with soft green cushions, the kind meant to make people feel calm. I spotted her right away. She was already seated, teacup in hand, looking out the window like she had nothing heavy to carry. I walked over. She stood to hug me. I didn't move. She sat back down, smoothing her skirt like we were two old friends catching up. "I'm glad you came," she said, her voice soft and easy. "I just want to clear the air." I didn't respond. She kept going. "Naomi's been through a lot. I know that. But she's confused, Claire. She's always had such an imagination. You know how kids are sensitive, emotional. It's hard to know what's real sometimes." She paused, looking for a reaction. I gave her none. "I don't want this to ruin our family," she said. "We've always had each other, haven't we?" Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. She slid it across the table toward me like it was nothing more than a menu. "What is this?" I asked. "Just something to consider," she said. "A compromise." I opened it. Inside was a draft petition for full custody, her intent to formally take Naomi back. Alongside it was a proposed mutual silence agreement. No court, no claims, just let it go. I looked at the words, then looked back at her. "You're trying to trade her trauma for your reputation," I said quietly. Her expression didn't change. "Claire, don't be dramatic. This is about keeping peace." I folded the papers and set them back on the table. "Is that what he called it too?" I asked. Keeping peace while she sat through his game. Her jaw tightened. She didn't answer. "You're making this worse," she said after a moment. "If you keep pushing, we'll fight back, and we will win." I placed my hands flat on the table. "You already lost her," I said. "The question is what else you're willing to lose." I didn't wait for her response. I left the envelope sitting between us like a fire waiting to catch, and walked out into the wind. I didn't look back. The next morning, Naomi sat at the kitchen table staring into her cereal. She stirred the spoon in circles, not eating. I asked her about her art club, about her teacher, about the book she'd brought home last week. She shrugged, didn't answer. I saw it in her face. Something was slipping again. After she left for school, I picked up her backpack to move it from the doorway. It was unzipped. I reached down to close it and noticed something stuffed between her notebooks, a thick piece of paper crumpled and bent like it had been hidden in a hurry. I sat down at the table and opened it. The drawing was rough but deliberate. A little girl sat on a bench, knees apart, with red crayon streaks scribbled across the space between her legs. Behind her stood a taller figure, drawn with broad shoulders, his face labeled in uneven handwriting, Uncle R. Off to the side were two more stick figures. One was labeled Mom, the other Grandma. Both were turned away. Naomi had come back inside. She forgot her lunchbox. She froze in the doorway when she saw the paper in my hands. Her eyes moved from the drawing to my face. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice cracked. I didn't mean to draw it. I didn't know how else to say it. I stood, walked over, and knelt beside her. I wrapped my arms around her. "You don't ever have to be sorry," I told her. "You're brave, and you're not alone." That afternoon, I picked her up early from school. We went straight to the front office and asked to see the school counselor. Miss Wheeler welcomed us into her office, a quiet room with low lighting and books lined neatly on the shelf. I handed her the drawing. Naomi sat beside me, eyes low. Miss Wheeler adjusted her glasses, took a long look at the paper, and turned to Naomi. "Sweetheart," she said, "did you draw this?" Naomi nodded once. Miss Wheeler stood, locked the door behind her, then sat back down. "Thank you for showing me," she said. "This is going up the chain now." Within the hour, the school submitted another formal report to Child Protective Services. The principal, Mr. Calder, came down to meet me. He shook my hand and said, "Whatever you need from us, we'll stand with Naomi." We left the school in silence. Naomi watched the trees outside the car window, her hand resting against the glass. I didn't ask questions. I just kept my hand on the wheel and made sure she knew I was there. Dinner that night was quiet, just soup and crackers. Naomi ate without much conversation, but she ate. After dishes, she came to my room and stood in the doorway. "Can I sleep with you tonight?" she asked. I nodded and pulled back the covers. She climbed in and curled close, her hands clutching the blanket near my shoulder. The room was dark, except for the hallway light glowing faintly through the cracked door. I could feel her breathing slow and steady. Then, barely loud enough to hear, she asked, "Do you think they'll believe me?" This time I didn't answer right away. I smoothed her hair and let the quiet settle. She wasn't asking if I believed her. She already knew that. She was asking about everyone else. She fell asleep with her hand wrapped around my wrist like she thought I might disappear if she let go. I lay awake most of the night, her whisper repeating in my head. The next morning I was in the kitchen when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was Miss Wheeler, the school counselor. "Claire," she said, "I think you need to come in." Naomi had left her school tablet in the reading nook the day before. Miss Wheeler opened it to charge it and found a recording. "It sounds like it might have started by accident," she said. "Or maybe not. Either way, you need to hear it." I told her I'd be there within the hour. After dropping Naomi off at school, I parked behind the library and opened the tablet Miss Wheeler had left for me. I pressed play on the recording. At first, just static, some sheets shifting distant footsteps. Then came voices. A woman's voice, sharp and tired. "Don't let her say too much at school." Another voice followed, clipped and cold. "If she keeps talking about that man, he'll go to jail. And then we all lose." I didn't need to guess who they were. Then Naomi's voice broke through. "But it hurts." A pause. "Then maybe stop acting like a brat," Kaylee snapped. There was a crack, the sound of a slap, then crying, soft, muffled, like someone trying to stay quiet. I sat there in the car, frozen, hands clenched around the steering wheel, knuckles aching. I played it again this time, recording the audio straight into my phone. No edits, no commentary, just the raw truth. Then I called Marcia Doyle, a legal advocate I'd worked with before. She picked up on the third ring. "Claire," she said. "It's been a while. You okay?" "No," I said. "I have a minor under my care. I have a recording verbal abuse coercion and a clear attempt to silence her." Marcia didn't hesitate. "Bring me the audio," she said. "We'll file an emergency petition for protective custody." That night when I walked in the door, Naomi was at the kitchen table coloring. She looked up, reached for a new drawing, and slid it across the table toward me. It was her again, but this time she was standing tall. In one hand she held a shield. In blocky, careful letters, the word Aunt Claire was written across the front. I knelt down beside her, touched my forehead to hers. This time I said, "No one's going to silence you." The next morning we were at the courthouse before the sun crested over the trees. Naomi wore her blue cardigan buttoned all the way to the collar and carried her raccoon tucked under one arm. In the car, she reached across the console for my pinky. She wrapped her small fingers around it and held on tight. Inside the courthouse echoed with the sound of heels on tile and the hush of voices bouncing off the high ceilings. Naomi kept her eyes low, her hand never leaving mine. We took our seats in the waiting area, and I handed the school tablet and my phone to Marcia as soon as she arrived. "I have everything ready," she said. "We'll be called in soon." The courtroom was colder than I expected, with rows of wooden benches and sunlight cutting in through the tall windows. When the bailiff called our names, I squeezed Naomi's hand once before we walked to the petitioner's table. Kaylee arrived a moment later, dressed sharply in a charcoal suit, her mother right behind her. They sat on the opposite side, their attorney and a stranger, a man in a gray blazer, leather briefcase, and stiff smile by their side. I realized quickly he was the expert witness they'd warned me about. The judge entered and called the hearing to order. His voice was steady and low, giving the impression he'd done this hundreds of times before. "Ms. Duncan, you're requesting emergency guardianship. Ms. Rollins, you filed a counter-petition for a full custody evaluation, and you've brought testimony regarding Ms. Duncan's stability. Is that correct?" Kaylee's attorney nodded and introduced the expert as Dr. Randall Kane, a therapist prepared to speak on my obsessive savior complex and the risk I posed to Naomi's well-being. Marcia, calm as always, leaned over and slipped me a note, "Not licensed in Kentucky." Dr. Kane took the stand, shuffling a pile of papers and speaking with certainty. "In my review of Ms. Duncan's volunteer work, social media activity, and recent behavior, I have observed a pattern of unhealthy attachment and a tendency to project trauma onto others. It is my professional opinion that this creates a risk of narrative distortion for any child in her care." Marcia didn't so much as blink. When it was her turn, she rose to address the court. "Your Honor, we submit Exhibit A, a direct audio recording from the minor's school-issued tablet capturing a conversation between Naomi and both her mother and grandmother." She pressed play. The voices in the recording filled the quiet room. First, Kaylee. "Don't let her say too much at school." Then my mother. "She needs to learn. If she keeps flapping her mouth about that man, he'll end up in jail, and then we all lose." Naomi's voice small and breaking. "But it hurts. A slap. Crying. Then maybe stop acting like a brat." Kaylee's voice snapped. I looked at Naomi. She stared at the floor, her knees pressed together. The judge listened to the whole recording before looking up. His jaw was set, but he waited as Marcia continued. "Exhibit B, Your Honor documentation from the Nevada Board of Behavioral Health. Dr. Kane was previously reprimanded and his license suspended for unethical conduct in diagnosis." She turned to Kane. "Are you currently licensed to practice in Kentucky?" Kane hesitated, mouth opening and closing before he managed, "My application is pending." Marcia nodded. "No further questions." The judge tapped his gavel once. "I've heard enough." His voice was even but final. Temporary emergency custody is granted to Ms. Duncan effective immediately. A criminal investigation into Mr. Marcus Rollins is ongoing. There will be a no-contact order for Ms. Rollins and Mrs. Green pending review." For a long moment, no one spoke. Kaylee's lips parted in disbelief. My mother looked down, twisting a handkerchief in her lap. On the other side of the room, the expert witness gathered his things quickly, his face a dull red. When the judge dismissed us, I stood and reached for Naomi's hand. We walked past reporters in the hallway, past lawyers gathered in clusters by the security desk. Outside, the air felt brighter. Naomi climbed onto the bench beside me and leaned into my side, her head under my chin. "Can I go home now?" she asked, her voice small but steady. I kissed the top of her head. "We're building a new one, just for you." 2 weeks later, the moment still glowed in my memory, a kind of porch light guiding us home. The new rental was smaller. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, but every wall had fresh paint, and every door swung open without a key. Each morning, I woke to the slap of Naomi's feet on hardwood as she came running in for breakfast. She lined her sneakers by the door, double-knotted a little proof to herself she wouldn't have to run away in the middle of the night again. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays we drove to art therapy. On off days, she went back to school, half days easing in with spelling tests and art club, letting the rhythm of childhood take hold again. In the evenings, we planted seeds together in the backyard, basil marigolds, 3 sunflower starts. She said the flowers would make the fence look happier. One Thursday, Naomi came out of her room holding a new drawing. This one was different. Across the top, she'd written the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. Next to each, a stick figure, me her grandpa with gray curls and a guitar, and the last a rectangle drawn around him like a shadow box, sharp eyebrows and an angry mouth labeled Uncle Ben. I froze. Uncle Ben Kaylee's brother, the bachelor who'd done card tricks at last year's Christmas party, had never crossed my mind. He wasn't in the reports, hadn't been at Thanksgiving. "Honey," I asked, keeping my voice steady, "why is Uncle Ben in a box?" Naomi looked away. "That's my room at Grandma's. He used to come in after the game." She watched me, her thumb rubbing the corner of her drawing. I didn't want to make trouble. I took a photo and sent it straight to Detective Loring, then sat on the back steps and waited for his call. It came within minutes. His voice was clipped and urgent. "We missed him. I'm sending a team to interview the other children who attended those family dinners." 5 days later, Loring called again. Uncle Ben had been arrested. 2 other minors had come forward, their stories matching Naomi's. That evening, I found Naomi out on the patio, watering the sunflower starts with a plastic jug. She was humming a little off-key, but louder than I'd heard her in weeks. I sat beside the planter box and watched the water darken the soil. "They grow slow," she said, her toes wiggling in the dirt. "But they're big when they're ready." I tugged the brim of her sun hat down over her eyes and nodded. "Just like you." The mailbox squeaked the next day. Inside was a cream envelope addressed in Mama's handwriting. My heart jumped as I tore it open. Claire. I was wrong. I wanted to believe the stories were lies because the truth hurt more. I will testify. I'm sorry I let silence speak for me. Mom. I read it at the kitchen table, Naomi coloring a castle beside me. When I finished, she set down her crayon. "I want to stay here," she said, quiet but certain. I smoothed the letter flat. "You will." Later, after dishes and a warm bath, she crawled onto the couch beside me. We shared banana pancakes for dessert, her idea. She leaned her head on my arm and let out a gentle sigh that sounded almost like relief. I thought of every night I'd counted her breaths, every slam of a door, every promise I'd made. Naomi yawned, pulling the blanket up over us both. "Does this mean I'm safe now?" she asked. I tucked her in a little closer. "No, baby," I said. "It means you're home." We didn't sleep much the night before the final hearing. Naomi lay beside me, her breathing steady, small hand curled in the fabric of my shirt. I listened to the soft tick of the hallway clock, to the sound of the street outside, waiting for the sun to rise. In the kitchen, I packed her lunch with a little note tucked inside, just a heart, and her name, and made sure her blue cardigan was laid out for morning. When it was time, we drove in silence. Naomi looked out the window, eyes following the bare trees and gray winter sky. At the courthouse, the marble steps gleamed in the cold light. Naomi held onto my hand, her raccoon tucked in the crook of her arm, her shoes double knotted. Inside, everything felt bigger. Voices echoed in the tiled halls. The courtroom was just as we'd left it. High windows, polished benches, the American flag in one corner. We sat at the petitioner's table while Marcia spread out our notes and evidence. I brushed a stray hair from Naomi's forehead, straightening her clip. She nodded at me, face set. The doors swung open, and Kaylee entered, flanked by her attorney, Mama, just behind. With them was Dr. Kane, the same so-called expert. Their lawyers smiled and handed a stack of papers to the judge. Judge Harrell started the session with a deep breath. "Ms. Duncan, you're requesting emergency guardianship. Ms. Rollins, you filed for full custody and provided expert testimony." Kaylee's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we call Dr. Randall Kane. He is prepared to speak about Ms. Duncan's mental health and her influence on the child's statements." Kane walked to the stand, placing his hands carefully on the wood rail. He began, "I've reviewed Ms. Duncan's history, her work at the shelter, her social media activity. I believe she exhibits signs of obsessive savior complex. Children in her care could absorb narratives that are not entirely their own." Marcia leaned close and scribbled a note. I glanced down and read, "Not licensed in Kentucky." The judge looked at me, then at Marcia. "Your response?" Marcia stood calm and clear. "Your Honor, we submit 2 exhibits. First, a recording from the child's school tablet." She pressed play on a small speaker. The courtroom fell silent as the audio played. Kaylee's voice came first, sharp and impatient. "Don't let her say too much at school. Then Mama, if she keeps talking about that man, he'll end up in jail, and then we all lose." Naomi's voice quiet, breaking. "But it hurts." The slap was unmistakable. The sound filled the room. More silence. Then, Kaylee again. "Then, maybe stop acting like a brat." The rest was Naomi's muffled crying. You could feel the stillness settle in. The judge kept his eyes on the bench. Marcia continued, "Exhibit B, Your Honor, disciplinary records from the Nevada Board of Behavioral Health. Dr. Kane's license was suspended for unethical diagnosis." She faced Kane. "Sir, are you currently licensed in this state?" Kane swallowed, his voice suddenly smaller. "My application is pending." "Thank you." "No further questions." Judge Harrell set his jaw. "I've heard enough." He looked directly at Kaylee, then Mama. "Temporary emergency custody is granted to Ms. Duncan, effective immediately. There will be a no-contact order for Ms. Rollins and Mrs. Green pending review. A criminal investigation into Mr. Marcus Rollins is ongoing." A chair creaked as Kaylee leaned forward, mouth open in disbelief. Mama reached for her arm, but Kaylee pulled away, her eyes dark with shock. Dr. Kane gathered his papers and hurried from the room. I knelt beside Naomi, brushed her hair behind her ear. She looked up, eyes wet but steady. "Can we go home now?" she asked. "We're building a new one," I told her. "Just for you." Outside, the air was warmer than it had any right to be. Sunlight spilled over the marble steps as we left the courthouse, Naomi's head resting against my shoulder. Over the next days, our house was quieter. Naomi began sleeping through the night again, shoes lined up neatly by the front door. Her drawings changed more castles, more sunflowers, fewer shadows in the corners. She started back at school, full-time, joined art club again. In therapy, she learned to name her feelings, to talk about what was safe and what wasn't. I packed her lunch every morning, slipped her favorite stickers into her notebook. Sometimes after dinner, we sat on the porch steps and watched the sun go down. Naomi watered her sunflowers and told me which ones were growing fastest. I listened grateful for every ordinary moment. One afternoon, as I folded laundry in the living room, Naomi came in with a new picture. This one showed a little girl standing in front of a tall shadow, but the girl was holding a shield. "That's me," she said, "and that's you behind me." She handed me the drawing. "You help me be brave." That night, I tucked her in with her raccoon and her picture under her pillow. She asked if she could stay in this house forever. I promised her we would do everything to make sure of it. As I turned out the light, I thought of the judge's gavel, of the way silence fell when the recording played. I remembered the first Thanksgiving, the cold porch, the call to 911, and how far we'd come since then. After the hearing, the days started to fall into place one after another. Naomi was back in school, making up missed assignments, easing into new routines. Her teacher sent updates twice a week, short emails about art projects and reading groups, notes about Naomi joining the other girls at recess. At home, she'd come through the door, drop her backpack by the shoe rack, and race to check her sunflowers along the fence. We made pancakes for dinner sometimes, or baked bread on rainy afternoons. The new house was smaller, but there was room for everything we needed. Therapy became a regular part of our lives. Naomi went 3 times a week, sometimes quiet in the waiting room, sometimes humming to herself. The art therapist brought out colored pencils, paper soft clay. Naomi started filling a box with drawings, some cheerful, some crowded with shadows, but more and more of them bright. One evening as I washed dishes, she slid a drawing across the kitchen table. "This is me and you," she said, "and this is the garden." In the picture, 2 stick figures stood side by side under a sunflowers blooming all around. We were settling in, but the past still flickered at the edges. One Thursday, Naomi came home with a new sheet of paper. She handed it to me, her eyes steady. Across the top, she'd numbered the stick figures, one for me, one for her, one for Grandpa, with his curly hair and guitar, and the last a box drawn around a frowning face labeled Uncle Ben. The box was shaded dark, the stick figure standing apart from the rest. I knelt beside her. "Honey, why is Uncle Ben in a box?" I kept my voice gentle, trying not to show the ache in my chest. Naomi looked down at her shoes. "That's my room at Grandma's. He used to come in after the game." She said it quietly, but she met my eyes. I took a photo of the drawing and sent it straight to Detective Luring. Within the hour, he called me back, voice brisk. "We're sending a team to interview the children from those family dinners," he said. "Thank you for sharing this. It may help more than you know." The waiting was hard. Days ticked by. Naomi seemed lighter busy with school and her sunflowers, but I checked my phone every hour for news. 5 days later, Detective Luring called again. Uncle Ben had been taken into custody. 2 other minors, both cousins from those crowded family gatherings, had described nearly the same experiences. Luring told me that Kaylee, in her interview, admitted she'd felt uneasy about her brother, but hadn't pressed further because family comes first. That night, I found Naomi on the back patio, watering her sunflower sprouts with a plastic cup. She was humming softly off-key and unafraid. I sat beside the planter box and watched her pour the water slow and careful over the dark soil. "They grow slow," she told me, "but they get big when they're ready." She dug her toes into the dirt shoulders, relaxing as the sun dipped below the fence. I nudged the brim of her straw hat down over her brow. "Just like you," I said. The next morning, I checked the mailbox and found an envelope addressed in Mama's tidy handwriting. I carried it inside, hands steady. I sat at the kitchen table and opened it while Naomi colored beside me. The letter was short. "Claire." I was wrong. I wanted to believe the stories were lies because the truth hurt more. I will testify. I'm sorry I let silence speak for me. Mom. I read it aloud. When I finished, Naomi set down her crayon. I want to stay here, she said, clear and simple. You will? I told her, smoothing the letter flat on the table. The days moved forward. Naomi fell into a new rhythm. School art sunflower watering therapy dinner and a bedtime story every night. She asked fewer questions about the past and more about the garden. She spent less time curled up against my side, more time sprawled out on the living room rug, building castles out of old cereal boxes and construction paper. Some evenings she'd sit on the porch steps with me, her head against my arm, and talk about the friends she was making or the books she was reading in class. We tried new recipes, watched baking shows, and sometimes, for no reason at all, had banana pancakes for dessert. I found myself watching her sleep some nights, her breath slow, and even her raccoon tucked under one arm. The house was quiet. The street outside quiet, too. I realized for the first time in a long time that the quiet felt good. One evening, Naomi asked, "Does this mean I'm safe now?" Her voice was almost a whisper. I pulled the knitted blanket over both of us. "It means you're home," I said, "and you're safe with me." She smiled, tucked herself closer, and was asleep in minutes. The seasons turned quietly after that. Naomi's sunflowers rose above the fence line. Bright faces turned to the morning light, their stalks stronger than they looked. Every day began with small routines, packing a lunch, tying double bows in her sneakers, the two of us laughing over burnt toast, or chasing the dog from the laundry pile. Our world was smaller now, but it felt safe, and for the first time in years, silence was a comfort rather than a warning. Sometimes I'd catch Naomi singing to herself in her room, her voice drifting through the doorway, a gentle melody that used to be swallowed by worry. She'd hang her artwork on the fridge castles, sunflowers, silly animals, and sometimes a shield or a heart. There were still hard days, shadows that lingered at the edge of sleep, or questions she needed answered more than once. But she always knew where to find me, and I always kept my promise, no matter how busy I was there to listen. Mama called once, her voice unsteady but honest. She said she would testify when the time came and that she wished she'd listened sooner. The old wounds between us would take time to heal, but something softer had begun to grow. Even Kaylee, quiet for months, sent a short note apologizing for the hurt and for not believing sooner. I didn't know if things would ever return to the way they'd been, but I did know we were building something new, something rooted in truth instead of secrets. Naomi started 3rd grade that fall. She wore her favorite blue dress and marched into her classroom with her head high. After school, she brought home a certificate for kindness and a new friend's phone number, both treasures she taped to her wall. We spent evenings in the backyard, planting bulbs for spring hands deep in the earth, letting hope take root alongside us. Looking back, I realized rescue doesn't always arrive with sirens or sudden revelations. Sometimes it's the steady sound of breathing in the dark, the softness of a hand in yours, the courage it takes to speak a truth no one else wants to hear. Justice isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's the simple fact of being believed and the quiet dignity of standing up for what is right, even when it's hardest. If you've listened all the way to the end, I hope you remember this. Strength isn't just about fighting battles for others. It's found in the quiet daily choices that add up to real safety and belonging. It's choosing love over comfort, honesty over silence, and building a life where even the most frightened child can grow tall and face the sun. If this story touched you, or if you have your own journey to share, I'd be honored if you left a comment or shared it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you're looking for more stories about hope, healing, and second chances, you're always welcome here.